Hi, I'm Chris Hunter, and I'm going to share with you probably an adventure that I had recently this year to the UN in New York as part of a delegation, as part of the Australian delegation. So we'll start now, and this right. Yeah. First of all, I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I've got severe hearing loss. I've had it all my life, and pretty much since the age of about 5 after a measles infection. And I had got my first hearing aids around about the age of 30. And because of that, it pretty much changed my life. And because I was able to acquire technology, it changed my life. I was able to get some further education, some tertiary education. I was able to then go on to a really satisfying and fulfilling career in teaching, which I absolutely loved. And I was a teacher of high school students right up till about 2012 when I retired. And because of that technology that I had, even though it probably was old by today's standards, I was able to really perform normally. So I was actually former president of Hearing Matters Australia. I actually joined Hearing Matters Australia, which was SHUSH. I rejoined, I should say, in 2013, because when I retired, I thought, oh, what do I do? And I know this lady over here introduced me to Shush, Jan. And she said, oh, why don't you come along? So I became a volunteer. And it was from that I learned a lot more about hearing loss and what I didn't know before. And pretty much all my working life, I tried to hide it and just appear normal like everyone else, I thought. And it was actually, in retrospect, it was very stressful. And because I learned a lot more about hearing loss, I acquired more ownership of it and decided to work with it and manage it a whole lot more. So I really am very thankful for that. I then became a member of the SHUSH board. After that, I became president fairly quickly. Didn't I, Jan? And I met a whole lot of people in my work with Hearing Matters, with what then became Hearing Matters Australia, not long after that I became more active in advocacy. That's not working. And advocacy for people with hearing loss. So I became part of panels for research. I did a lot of outreach speaking. I wrote submissions to Parliament on behalf of Hearing Matters Australia and SHUSH. I appeared at Parliament to present there to present our view on my submission, and I got really quite involved. So after that, I was then nominated to represent Deafness Forum Australia on the board of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, which is a peak organisation for consumer organisations, but for all disabilities, not just hearing loss. So I represent Deafness Forum on that board. And as part of that board, I'm now currently Vice President and Treasurer of the AFDO board. We just call it AFDO for short because it's a bit of a mouthful to say the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations all the time. So AFDO actually works a lot with government and policy makers. They also engage with people with disabilities so that they can be part of programs where changes can be made, where they can get involved in programs to actually make life better for people with disabilities, not just hearing loss. So I've been up issues around hearing loss, Other people might bring up issues around, might be Down syndrome, it could be stroke recovery survivors, it could be those with mobility issues. So it's very broad. I think AFDO was really quite prominent in the recent NDIS review and also the aged care review as well. So a lot of sort of companies has come out of that and will continue to over this following years. So I then became part of the Australian delegation to attend COSP. You think, well, what's COSP? COSP is the Conference of State Parties to the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that's at the UN in New York, and that's held every year. So I think I've already said a bit about AFDO, so we'll go back to this slide. AFDO is actually a disabled persons organisation, cross-disability representative organisation, and the national voice, representing people with disability across Australia. Members, they can be advocacy organisations run by people with disabilities and their families, and Deafness Forum is a foundation member of that organisation. Its vision is to achieve a community where people with disabilities can participate economically, politically and in cultural ways in their lifetime. So that's the aim, or that's the mission. And it also provides policy advice and representation to government organisations that impact the lives of people with disabilities. So that's their focus, and that's why they get involved in programs to actually try and achieve these aims. It also works with people with disabilities and organisations to inform and educate and provide opportunities for people with disabilities. It's very broad ranging because it's not just about hearing loss. And I think I have found over time that because, well, a long time actually, because hearing loss is so invisible, the awareness about hearing loss is almost invisible. So you really have to make it, you have to speak out and just say, well, this is what's happening, this is what's not happening. And just try very hard. So, about the CRPD, or the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So, this is the crux of why we went to the UN. So it's actually a treaty to promote an international human rights treaty to promote, protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of human rights and freedoms by all people with disabilities. That's pretty wide ranging. It's one of 14 international human rights treaties, and it was ratified in 2008 by the Australian government and in force since 2009. In Australia, the responsibility for ensuring the rights of people ensuring the disability rights is shared by state and territory governments and federal, and it's the Attorney General Department and Department of Social Services that actually implement that. So we have an obligation, the government has an obligation to actually try and comply with what is in the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So we are bound to actually do that. So COSP, and we'll call it COSP, the conference in New York, that happens every year, and it's actually an annual reporting mechanism. So the Australian government has to report every year to the UN at this conference about what they've been doing to comply with this convention. So every year it has a theme, and it has sub-themes, this conference. It's held in New York every year at the UN. So the overarching this year was Rethinking Disability Inclusion in the Current International Juncture and Shared ahead of the Summit of the Future. Summit of the Future has been held in about now. It's been held this month, I think in Berlin. And what they're looking at is, well, what this conference is looking at in terms of the theme is how is inclusion in disability happening in this time when you've got wars, you've got floods, you've got all sorts of things happening. How is disability being managed? Is anything happening to it, or how are we coping with it? Okay, the first sub-theme was around digital inclusion. I'm not going to read all of that out, but it's basically about digital inclusion for people with disabilities. The second sub-theme was around situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. And the third theme was around equal employment for people with disabilities. Now those are three sub-themes. And so you had to prepare for going to the conference around that. And you could you could volunteer to speak if you felt that you had something you could offer, or you could just go and participate. I sort of thought later, unfortunately, but I did put my hand up. I just put my hat in the ring and said, okay, I was interested in the second theme, which is around risk and humanitarian emergency, and particularly around bushfires and floods. I mean, we've had it all in Australia over the last few years. So, and it's made me think quite a lot about, well, how would I cope if suddenly I was, thrust out of my home and, okay, there's no power, there's no backups, what do I do? And so that to me is really, was a fun in my mind, and I thought nothing more of just applying. So sure enough, after a while, before I left, I got the reply back from the UN to say, yes, you're in. And I thought, oh no. So anyway, we progressed. So I'll talk about that later. So who attends? Who attends this conference? The state parties, which is the government, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Department of Social Services. There you go. We've got delegates from a number of disability organisations. So one disability organisation is AFDO, of which I was one of 6 delegates. And you've got other organisations as well. And I'll get to more detail about that later. Also, there's also an inclusion of international human rights organisations as well. For example, the Australian Human Rights Commission. So, the Commissioner, she was there. Although she did have an accident on the way, but anyway, that was by the way. So why do we attend? Because, as I said before, we have to report. It's a reporting mechanism. So we have a commitment as an NGO, which is a non-government organisation. AFDO has a commitment in consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council, and because of that, they need to report. And they have to write a report every 4 years, which is read by the UN Commission, and they report back. So in 2019, Australia got a report back that they were not compliant in something. They had to lift their game in a couple of things. I'm not privy to that. I don't really know at this stage, but I do know that there's accountability there. We also go to network with some other non-government international partners, such as the Disabled People's International Global Initiative for ICTs, which is digital inclusivity, the Pacific Disability Forum, the Australian Disability Development Consortium, Christian Blind Association, Mission Australia, and they're all there as well. So why do we actually go continued? The see, you get all of these people together, all in one place. So it's a really, really good place to consult with all of them together, to get them all together. You know, if you can, quite often, if they're all over the place, you can't actually get to speak to people and you can't meet them personally on a number of occasions. So we had the federal ministers there. Okay, this time it was Bill Shorten, Department of Foreign Affairs, Health and Aged Care, Ambassador to the UN, Australian Human Rights Commission, and Australian Disabilities Strategy Advisory Council. So they were there as well. We also networked with other non-government organisations, and you can see a list of them there. People with disabilities, there's a few of them there. First People with Disability Network, Women with Disabilities Australia, etc. So there's a lot of them there that over the course of 5 days you can actually get to meet and liaise with them and talk in a number of different situations. So to make a difference, we also go to make a difference. There's guest presentations at side events. For example, there was a side event on climate change, which had to do with the theme. All of the side events and the presentations have to do with all of these themes, these three themes, three sub-themes that I was talking about. There's also interventions to the general debate. One of them was mine, and the other two, they're Elvis and Trevor. They also made interventions as well on the floor of the General Assembly. And in terms of the interventions, mine was about the development of fireproofing at-risk communities, which was a liaison between government, universities, Fire and Rescue New South Wales and AFDO. AFDO provided some of the people with lived experience to actually provide information for this. And also there was an intervention by Trevor. He did an intervention about the inaccessibility of the UN building, because a lot of people there were in mobility vehicles like wheelchairs, scooters, and they could not sit at a desk. They did not have a desk in front of them. There were various other parts of the building itself that they couldn't have access to. In fact, they had a lot of guards there. Everywhere you went in the place, there was security with guards. And one level, Trevor went to try and get access, and they said, "Oh, you can't have access here. You're not in a wheelchair." He was in a mobility scooter. What's the difference? So there was an intervention about that. And because there is an intervention or an address, they have to respond to that, particularly if it's formal. So we also co-chair roundtables at the Civil Society Organisations forum. So that means that if you have a side event or you have a forum or something like that, you can be part of the chair. We didn't do that this year, but we have done it in past years. And also we advocate for change. That's why everyone goes. We're all advocating for change, for disability. So that's our team. Not very good photos, I'm afraid. But over here, that was at the welcome reception. You've got Bill Shorten in the middle there. We had some First Nations people from Queensland who came and did a magnificent welcome ceremony. And there's, I think I'm there. There's a few of us. The rest of our team, which is here, that's our team. That's Grant Lindsay, Trevor, Carol, myself, Elvis Martin. We were there representing AFDO. So what's the next one? So the format, which is over 5 days. So the first day we have to get briefings, and I have to say that before you even get to New York, there's about 3 or 4 weeks of preparation involved between Department of Social Services, DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and you have to get your passes to go into, you have to get your letter to go into the UN from the United Nations, and if you don't have that, you can't get in at all. So they have to accept you and really screen you to make sure that you can go in. So that was really quite, and you have to have briefings before that so that we're all on the same page when we go there. There's about 45 delegates from Australia, mostly from Department of Social Services and DFAT. Some of them were heads of departments, those sorts of things. Some of them were younger members of those organisations who were actually learning about what happens in New York, which was really interesting for them as well. So on the second, we had to first of all then go to once we're there, day one, we have to, I'll go back to that. You have the briefings, okay? So in New York, that first day we had to just get briefing as to how things work, where to go, what format it's going to take, and some of those things, particularly for people who hadn't been there before. And that was online. So I was, and unfortunately, internet access wasn't wonderful for that in our hotel. So I couldn't really, it wasn't very good. So anyway, you just do what you can do. So day two, collect the security passes, which was, I've never seen anything so disorganised in my life. You go to a conference normally and they have everything laid out in alphabetical order, and this was just a jumble. Where's your pass? You know, so it was incredible. I thought, is this the UN? Anyway, that's what it was. And then we had to go through security over the other side of the road, which was full body scan, empty out everything, go through the x-ray thing and back in. That happened every day. And then once you get into the UN, you have to go through special doors to get to various conference rooms, through security again, through guards with guns, and they didn't muck about. So if you didn't have the right pass, you didn't get into that part. So it was really quite interesting. Quite confronting actually. So day two, once you get in there, all right, was the Civil Societies Organisation Forum. That was where I spoke. And at the end of that day, there was the Australian Welcome Function, which was put on by the UN Ambassador, the Australian UN Ambassador, which was really good, and that's where that previous photo was from. And day 3 to 5, that's where everything kind of happened. You had the main welcome, which was on the Tuesday, I think, the third day, and then after that you had lots of side events. And really, that on the last day, we did not finish until 8 p.m. at night. So it went all day for all of those, for the rest of those days. So by the time you finished, I was absolutely dead. I think most people were, because you kept going the whole time. If I ever get another opportunity to go, I think I would probably have a better idea of where to go, what to do, what not to bother going to, that sort of thing. But you certainly try to fit as much as you can in. But with every intervention, we had only 3 minutes. Every speaker, no matter where you were from, had 3 minutes. If you went over, they just cut you off. So it was really important to try and get as much in as you could in that 3 minutes. So I went, I think, to about 2:58 or something like that, 2 minutes 58, whatever it was. But it was quite intense preparing for that, to try and get it down to that time. So if I get an opportunity, and I've got a computer over there with audio, it might work. So I gave my speech on in relation to the risk and humanitarian emergency, and that was in relation to the Fire and Rescue New South Wales liaison with the various organisations that I mentioned before about fire and flood risk, and the fact that 47% of people in New South Wales who lose their lives in fire emergencies are people with disabilities. So that's a pretty high statistic. And I sort of thought, well, I could be one of those if we lost power, if we didn't have access to things that could help us with disabilities, if we didn't know what to do, if we didn't know how to save ourselves, if we didn't know where to go. So that's pretty much what that was about. So moving on from that, because I'll try and play it shortly, but there were side events as well. So the side events were around quite a few things, which I'll go through shortly. So you had Development Australia's autism strategy. Bill Shorten, he presented that at the Grand Assembly, and so that's something that the government, the UN would probably be wanting to hear, whether there's things happening there in Australia. The disability inclusion in Ukraine, I have to say that one was absolutely packed out because people were very concerned about what's happening in Ukraine, and also Gaza, that came up. It was mentioned that you might be talking to someone on the phone to Gaza in the morning, in the afternoon unfortunately they're dead. And also what was happening with people with disabilities is that because of these wars, we're getting more people with disabilities, and there's no infrastructure to actually assist them. So it's really serious. The Permanent Mission of New Zealand and Ireland, they had global perspectives on best practices and innovations in supporting autism. So autism was a really big topic apparently overall, and they had some really interesting things that they were doing. And it was interesting that it was all about co-design, which was getting people with lived experience to be at the table when these things were happening, when these policies were being developed, or these programs are being developed. And that's really what needs to happen. You have to be at the table, you've got to advocate, you've got to put your hand up, and you've got to say, look, this is what I need, this is where the problem is, this is what I can't do, this is what would help me. There was a Disabled People's Forum, there was, Women with Disabilities, Accessible Crisis Preparedness from Sweden and the Nordic Council of Ministers. It was really interesting with this one. That's one that I really did enjoy. It was interesting that their idea of emergencies wasn't fire, maybe floods, maybe, but also war, because that's where they're more affected. They're expecting maybe wars, preparedness for that. Not fire so much. Although Northern Europe, for example Greece and places like that, they're getting more fires. They're not prepared for those. They don't know what to do. So by sharing some of these, by sharing our ideas, that's where it helps everyone. It was also interesting that Sweden they were thinking that the best solution would be to put people with disabilities on a register so that they could be accessed in times of emergency. So we discussed this, and we felt from the Australian delegation that this probably really wouldn't work that well, because in situations of emergency you don't always have access. You don't always have the emergency services there available. Everything's in upheaval. It's better if people with everyone knows what to do. So how can I better prepare myself? how can I access things that I need, even for a person with disability, whether it's a mild one, whether it's a communication one, whether it's a mobility issue. You need to know what's available. And this program that I was talking about, they were developing strategies for people with disabilities to actually take on board. And it might have been reading material that's easy access, easy read. It might be some other information there that could be easily understood. So that's where it was quite interesting. That was one of the really good ones, I thought. So next one, which is coming up, reflections. There were a lot of reflections. The UN has got a long, long way to go to be really accessible for people with disabilities. Just the building itself and just the UN. It was interesting that Trevor, our co-delegate from AFDO, he wrote a letter to the UN, a formal letter, after he made his intervention, and they have a post office at the UN down on the bottom floor. So wrote his letter, formal letter, a complaint, went down there, got the stamp, everything, need to post a letter. Oh, it's going just upstairs to some office in the UN. Oh, you can't post this letter here. You've got to go across the road, you've got to go out, across the road, post a letter there, and it can come back here. So he had to go out, come back through security, in a scooter, back in, and then proceed. So little things like that were a bit off. So getting off that, it was actually a great opportunity to network, learn from others, and showcase what we do well. Okay, we do a few things well. We might be short on some things, but we do some things well. Some of the things that some of the other delegates spoke about Down syndrome, there were some very powerful presentations there from Australia. There was another very powerful one from First Nations people. And the First Nations delegation, they had an art display that they had done about their specific journeys with disability, which was absolutely amazing. It was beautiful. And the message that shone through really was the importance of advocacy and about advocates being part of the process and working with their organisations to actually make things better. So that's what I just keep thinking, coming back to advocacy, just keep doing it. And nobody else does, we have to. And it's actually critical for people with this experience to be at that table and be part of that conversation. Say what you need, say what's not happening, what needs to happen. And also, there's several of the less developed countries that they've got a further way to go than what we do. And they've got fewer policies in place, there's lower awareness. So I think Australia, I won't say we're top notch, but we're getting there. There's a lot of things we still need to do, but we are getting there. Some countries are better at some things than others, and we're part of that as you. But I think we're certainly doing as well, a lot better than some. So, do you have any questions at all? And can you have a think of what you can do to actually help? I mean, I guess all of us here, we're all advocates. In terms of hearing loss, we're advocates for that. But I have to say that at the UN, hearing loss wasn't a big issue. You had a few people there who were deaf. Okay, you had the signing, all of that, that's fine. But I'm thinking, hearing loss is so frustrating because nobody can see it. It's invisible. So we just, what's invisible you can't see, it's not immediately obvious. And you really have to sort of say, I have hearing loss. This is what works best for both of us if we can do some of these things, some of these strategies. Please face me, speak clearly, all of those things. So we have to speak up for ourselves, because if we don't, nobody else will. And the more of us that get on that bandwagon and do it, the better off we'll be, because it affects everybody. Imagine if you were in that fire, and as I was talking to Sandra before, you've got hearing aids, hearing devices, assistive hearing devices, whatever. How are you going to get power for that? Where are you going to get it? How are you going to survive? If you don't have any of that, you can't communicate with anyone. And to me, that's a huge issue, a really huge issue.